Hey guys, thanks for joining us on Marketing After Dark. Today we are going to be talking about Cannes Lions with none other than the digital prophet himself, David Shing, or as we lovingly call him, Shingy. Shingy is the connoisseur of all things Cannes Lions. So today we're going to be talking with him about what we loved, what we hated, what worked, what didn't work. So thank you so much for joining, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hi, Shing.
G'day. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I actually would love it if you don't mind introducing yourself and telling everybody who you are.
Hi guys, I am somebody who used to work with Lauren, and it feels like 1,000 years ago, but she obviously went on to do bigger and better things than I ever could. But I'm Shingy. I spent the last 10 years of my life sitting on an aeroplane talking to brands, large and small, and the industry at large about things that are coming and behaviours and creativity and all things that matter. I do that today. In the last 16 months, it's just been a little bit different. It's a bit more like this, and it's all very interesting. That's me.
Amazing.
That's kind of a weird introduction, but are we cool with that?
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Are you, I guess like one of the things we want to talk about today is Cannes, because obviously Cannes Lions is wrapping as we speak, and the festival's wrapping. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, well, first of all, what is Cannes and why do people care?
Oh, what a great question. So let's cover that off. So the Festival of Creativity, the Festival of Creativity is Cannes Lion. There are plenty of other award shows that happen in the industry and throughout the season, but what I really like about Cannes Lion is it all culminates, not just because it's in the south of France, but it all culminates in a sort of a multi-vibe, which is, yes, it's an award show, but there are a number of categories that are very, very interesting that have been introduced along the way, and it shows you culturally what's happening in the world of branding and marketing. And the flip side of that is there's also really good ideas shared. So it's both a platform and an award show, but it's really just this circus of creativity, which I love. And I've been going there for almost a dozen years or so. So I've been around it a long time and spoken at it many times.
I was going to say you were one of the only people that's spoken on the main stage several times, right?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, and I also have been educating there for many years. So I take the kids who I think are going to be incredible through the next wave, and I tend to sort of sit with them and mentor them and help them through and hopefully inspire them or scare them, one or the other. But that's kind of the gig, really.
Very cool. I mean, obviously, Cannes has been a bit different this year and last because of the pandemic, and it's been sort of a hybrid model, not even hybrid, really just digital. But nevertheless, here we are. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about kind of what are some of the big themes that you've seen this year,
Sure.
What's emerging in terms of like the types of brands that are really breaking through, and what type of creativity is garnering a lot of attention.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so let me step back and I'll give it more of a macro view. The Festival of Creativity tends to cover all these incredible topics that are pretty linear. The last 16 months, it's been a singular brief in my mind, which is how do we make sure we're doing good shit in the world, making sure it's sustainable and at the same time it's diverse, both in its thought and its execution. We've all been on the same path. I don't think any of us knew it was all going to happen clearly because of this thing called a pandemic that came along. So 2020 awards got blown apart. They didn't do any at all. So for 2021, what they did is they did 2020 and 2021 combined together and smashed all these awards together. But what's secretly been happening in the industry since around, I believe, 2017, 2018, is that there's been these common themes that brands have been thinking about, but there hasn't really been a platform for that to be celebrated, and that's where Cannes articulated it. What am I talking about? Those sustainability, the ability for technology to have a better sense of humanity, and also, what are we doing that's just good and diverse? For this theme now and ongoing, probably for the next couple of years until we forget about our muscle memory, it's going to be diversity and for good at the core of it. And if it isn't, those brands just aren't going to participate. So if you ask me what was the most incredible piece of work that I saw, I already have that in my bent. I already have that in my thought. And the reason is I've just spent 16 months trying to make sure I don't fall down that rabbit hole again, psychologically, physically, spiritually. So, and if I'm feeling like that, you're probably feeling like that. If you're feeling like that, brands should be feeling like that. And if the brand is feeling like that, the people who consume those brands are feeling like that. So that's where there's been this common theme, which is, yep, it's got to be sustainable, you better well be diverse, and you better have a point of view, because if you don't, you're not going to matter. But that's always been there. It's just been highlighted now because we're all feeling it. Before it was kind of hidden in the dark corner, and we didn't get to highlight it so much. So let me also just sort of pause and paraphrase. There are some really interesting work that's happened in the kind of comedy category of just making great creative that hopefully helps people laugh. But it didn't resonate to me as much that I would have thought it would have in other years. Like there was one from Cheetos, the orange fingerty thing that, you know, those little, Cheetos, that thing that makes your fingers orange, I guess. What's interesting about those is that they did a Super Bowl ad that had MC Hammer in it. And you can't touch this because your fingers are all dirty. And it was a very funny little play, and it felt like a little bit like I'd seen from Evian 10 years ago. But it probably been at the forefront of my mind if I had that consciousness, but I don't. I've been really thinking about the purpose side of it and what's been really amazing. And here's what's also incredible. The thematics that have come down the path that I've been spending time looking at, particularly for Cannes, they've all been longer. So you'll sit there and watch something for 7 minutes where you can't get away with that. It's either a 30-second TV spot or a 60-second at best. But people can do these episodics and they can do this incredible work that could go on for longer and longer time periods. Because for some reason we seem to articulate that in video. We don't do that in music, by the way. I'll give a song about 15 seconds before I believe it's hot or not. But when it comes to video, there tends to be more forgiveness there. So the work that I thought was really amazing had a tension to it that was longer. Let me also say that the brands that I've spoken to over the last 12 months, the one thing that's resonated, which I started to feel like emotionally they've tapped into, is nostalgia. So the idea of saying, whatever I consume or whatever I'm thinking about, is it going to give me comfort and does it make me feel good? And maybe does it give me a sense of going back to something that made me feel like it was a time that I really did feel wonderful. So when I spoke to the CMO of Smuckers, for example, he said, look, we're not innovating any new products because we can't get enough peanut butter and jam to people as it is because they want that nostalgic sandwich. I don't know, but that's sort of an example of it. But it's a little diversion from Cannes specifically, but it's this tension that I'm seeing in the industry, period. And I think it's a really good time to sort of articulate that, and it showed in the work that I saw in Cannes.
Yeah, I mean, Got Milk, the Milk Pep campaign, is like back in a big force on TikTok. So I totally agree with you that like what was old is now fresh again.
But you don't drink milk, do you? Tell me, you're lactose. You don't have any lactose?
No, I actually do.
You're an Oatly person, I hope?
No. I drink
half
and half in my coffee. I know, is that crazy?
What's wrong with you? How pedestrian.
I'm the last person in New York City that still drinks milk.
Just
I know.
kidding. Oh, that's awesome. Good for you, sister.
And apparently all the people on TikTok, so there you go. No, I totally agree with you. It's funny. I was actually, they say that art mimics reality, and in years where there's been suffering, pandemics, war, we've kind of gravitated to more comedy and lighthearted content, and vice versa on years where we've had more sort of lighthearted things or not as serious things happening. We've gravitated towards more serious tone in our art. But it's funny that one of the things I totally saw in Cannes, which I think you were speaking to, is that it was actually the opposite. Like everything was somber, everything was serious, everything had a point of view. And even the sort of silly, ads and brands, like the Cheetos example, it just didn't quite feel like it hit in the same way this year, given that everything that's gone on.
Yeah, and the category that I pay attention to most, and by the way, when it comes to categories, there's like 20 of them or something. It's really wide. But the category that I always spend time at, and typically, Lauren, what my time in Cannes is not just celebrating the creativity and speaking and educating and all that good stuff, but it's actually spending time with people in the industry, which I don't get enough chance to. It feels like when we're not even, when we are together. And then when we weren't, it just feels like, wow, does this still really matter? And I sat back and thought it matters even more, because if the work that I saw cut through the usual channels that I would consume that content, awesome. But you talked about TikTok. So when you think about potentially short form content that feels a bit memey and or repetitive, because that's the way that platform articulates, when I looked at the Cannes content, I really wasn't looking for stuff that was platform specific. What I was really looking for is craft. I think is outstanding, meaning that people have had a chance to pause, think about the way they shoot things, think about the way they have to think about their brands shooting things, and what does that craft look like? For example, I mean, there's so much UGC content out there. If you look at TikTok, is that going to be the new form of producing a 30-second TV spot if somebody's still buying that channel? Maybe. Or maybe it goes the other way, which is a way better craft of actually just articulating story. The other category I always spend time in is in print and outdoor. And the reason for that is these have been in our industries for a long time, and if somebody communicate really, really well in those platforms, then amen. Because I believe that design, if it's done really well, that distinction could become itself more iconic than the brand itself, which I think is really interesting. A good example of that, which wasn't in the Effectiveness Awards this year, but it was definitely in 2018-19, was the Colin piece from Nike.
Yeah.
And what I loved about that was it was just a billboard. So how bland was that? But it was done so compellingly and so relevant that it really resonated. But fast forward to here, one of the pieces of work that I thought was phenomenal was by Heineken. So Heineken took, all of these pubs had been shuttered, literally with a door pulled down, and they decided, instead of spending money on billboard, outdoor advertising style, what if we go and place that media money and give it to the bars, and we can put our branded ad on the bar shutter. And it was so contagious that even their competitors went and did it as well. Like Guinness participated and others. So, and I thought, how relevant. One, you've got these bars that serve your product that can't be open. Instead of having the door pulled down and graffiti potentially on it, they decided that's going to be the media. Genius. Absolute genius move. And if you think about that, how does that relate? It's just a different way of thinking about, one, the community of which you participate in, the audience that's called to you, and the people that benefit from it. So I thought it was a really good way of participating in that. There's also a piece of work that came from Renault in Europe. I'm sorry, I know you want to talk about something else in a second, but there's this incredible piece of work in Europe and I think the little town's called Appy. I think it's Appy or Abbey. Yeah, I think it's Appy. And they wanted to become, well, they didn't want to become, but they won the competition to become the first all-electric car city. And every little resident in that city got a Zoe, which is a Renault. And for me, it was really interesting because it talked about the precursor before they become electrified. It became the delivery of the electrification of the car, and then the experience of these people. And by the way, this is a pretty countrified, rural environment we're talking about here. And it was just this wonderful way of saying it enriched people's lives in ways they never would have thought if they're living in farmland, with this incredible future-forward essence of what Renault could do. And I was just kind of inspired by the humanness of all of that and bringing people along. It's not just for the people in Silicon Valley. It's for people who may want to come along for that ride, and I thought it was just interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like some of your favorites were more, like you said, about the idea and the connection and the human element than necessarily the 30-second spot or the, like you said, the platform across which it's running. Although, interestingly, the Kaepernick campaign had long legs this year because it won a Lion for media execution because it was able to drive so much actual ROI from Nike's perspective. Right.
Which it would have been all over. The Effectiveness Award, which means it can win a bunch of Lions, but it can come back the next year and win an Effectiveness Award, which is it was so effective in the way it was executed, which I thought was, it's interesting to see what they could have done. And what they did do, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that this idea that does connect and is human is actually able to, at the end of the day, do what we're all supposed to do, which is drive sales. And
I have this principle of, instead of trying to make people buy stuff, is can we make stuff that people want to buy? It's the other way around. And in that instance, one of the brands who I've been a massive fan of this brand. I'm not a massive consumer of their product, but I'm a massive fan of their brand, and that's Burger King. And what Fernando's done over there, he's gone on to Activision now, but he in his legacy, in his wake, there are a number of definitions of that brand that I think are really kind of future forward. One is he introduced via marketing the first non-beef burger that they have there, non-meat burger. So they have an Impossible Burger. And what's amazing about that is it has the texture, flavor, etc., as a meat burger. But is that really what their audience were demanding? I would say no. But they understand that the sustainability of this farming for human consumption is not on our radar. We have to do something better than that. So he came out with the Impossible Burger, and I would say that's marketing influencing the future of the product. Awesome. On the flip side of that, from the pure marketing perspective, the two pieces of work from Burger King I thought was outstanding, and you'll know this piece of work, which is Moldy. So the Moldy Whopper piece of work won a ton of awards across every other industry or every other award show, and also won a bunch of awards here as well. And you'd think, oh, it's because it's incredible that they're showing their product is fresh and non-GMO to the point where, except for the Impossible Burger, which is what it is, that it'll literally mold in front of you over time. Great. Mm-hmm. But the one I thought was really impressive is that Burger King sponsored like the lowest ranking football team, soccer team, and branded their jerseys, and they're sort of trying to create this powerfully underdog. And I thought, what a genius move. Instead of going and sponsoring the big stadiums and the obvious teams, go and do this move where you're like, I'm going to go and sponsor probably the worst team in the league and hope if I can get these misfits to get their shit together, and I'm going to help them along with my brand. I thought that was really that camaraderie was really subtle, but had a lovely essence to it.
That's awesome. Yeah, they just do the coolest stuff.
Lauren, what's the favorite piece of work that you saw? And is there one, or is there many? And is it a collection of work in its totality means this is something that I think I need to watch?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that obviously diversity was a huge theme for this year. I thought that some of the product innovation was really cool, like the deodorant from Unilever, that was they made for people who didn't have full use of their limbs, so it's for disabled people. I think one of my favorite ads of the year, I don't even know if it won anything, but one of my favorite ads of the year was Heineken, and it was the female ordering the beer and then the male ordering the cocktail. And in every situation, like, she would order the burger, he would order the salad, and like the waiter they'd have to switch it back. She would order the Heineken, he would order the Cosmo, and they'd have to switch it. And it was just like, don't make assumptions about anybody. Yeah, and I thought it was just really awesome.
Where I think it's
kind of
been
like that messaging.
Yeah, and that theme that you're talking, the undertow of those themes that you're talking about is there's a quirk. There's something unusual. Why? Because we are. Everybody who walks around on planet Earth, the almost 8 billion people of us, we've all got these interesting human traits and quirks. And our responsibility as people who represent brands is to try and at least tap into those. And not through the usual hitting them over the head with these consistent messages. That's a frequency discussion that's very different in my mind. But one of the products that I was very impressed by was a new company called Not Pla. And it's called Not Pla because it's short for not plastic. And it's a seaweed material that allows you to put a product in it like a Lucasade or a juice would go in it, or even a cocktail. And you're basically eating the packaging, which I thought was, it's almost like a Tide Pod in its look. And I think that's a really interesting way of saying, well, what has that got to do with the creative community? It's got everything to do with it because they help invent the product and the brand at the same time. And that's where, the industry itself is changing. So for many years, we've been talking about brand experiences being the baseline. Yeah, get it. And then we talk about disruption. Sure. And if you're not disrupting, you better be disrupting. And now what we're really talking about is transformation. And we've been talking about that for years, but we haven't understood how to articulate it. Now we're at a point where transformation is front and center. Let me give you another example. H&M is one of the largest clothing manufacturers on planet Earth of fast fashion, which means ultimately they are part of the problem because their shit is ending up in our oceans, which is ending up in our food stream. And they understand that. So their consciousness is, we want to do better. It's a bit like the petroleum companies for the last 100 years. So they created a thing called Loop. And the idea was that any type of material could come back and they would put it into their headquarters, and they built this machine that took all of these fabrics and stripped out all the bits and bobs and created a new weave, and people could design to it. But that sounds great in a closed ecosystem, but in a real ecosystem where it's all about, transparency and helping the betterment of human, they opened it up to other vendors. So it's not just them. So the loop isn't closed. It's an open loop, which I thought was really quite inspiring for a company that's in fast fashion. So that aspiration for me is just really powerful. I also love the fact that a lot of these big brands, particularly the Fortune 100s, are understanding that at the core of them, they need to be inclusive. But how are they going to be inclusive? And to be and I'm not just talking about the pride flag once a bloody month in a 12-month period. That sucks. Pride is every single day. So you've got people like MasterCard that allow people to have this name on card thing where they're able to actually say, this is the person I identify with, not the driver's license that you're forcing me to show where I'm actually a different person.
Totally.
Starbucks did that in Europe where they said, look, we want to put your name on the cup. We want you to be who you are going to be. But they actually did this day where they allowed people to come in and they helped them facilitate the movement to their transgender name in a way that was really palatable, not just the name on the cup, but all the things they need to do legal-wise to help them be that person in society and be fully inclusive. So that I thought was just...
That's
it takes
awesome.
it so far. It takes it so far away from outdoor advertising, 30-second TV spots, Super Bowl pieces. It takes it into, if the society is changing, what's the responsibility for a brand that is front and center to be part of that? Because if you're not part of it, you'll be forgotten about. So up to you. But
Yeah.
if it was me, you want to get on board with that, because that's what you should understand is moving with or without your permission anyway.
Yeah, and like these brands are able to help solve an issue that maybe the majority of people didn't know about, right? You talked about the True Name card, and it's like, sure, most people don't even think about the fact that it's like a pain in the ass to not have your real name on the card, or to have to change your name legally. Like it's kind of a pain in the ass. So the fact that MasterCard thought through that and then was able to actually create a product that would, help those people, but then at the same time give them sort of that brand halo that, they were doing that for the trans community. I thought that was awesome.
And if you look at what if you take that a higher level outside of the tactics of doing that, which is a really interesting way of actually embedding their brand in it. They've been working on Sonics for a few years, and so they got this brand DNA based on Sonics. So the ding dong that you actually do when you do a transaction at the terminal, that strand of that DNA is much longer and more languid. So they've got to a point where they've got this orchestral music. They've got an album with all these different sound engineers and performers from all parts of the world who've taken these little tiny DNA strands and extrapolated it out to this much broader strategy, which is one element of Sonic, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about it. And it all comes back down to, at the end of the day, when they do that thing that says, this is really the name, this is who I want to be represented by, the sound of that comes from this strategy that came back all the way back there and suddenly landed. And that's where I think is, not only has the 16 months with the same brief allowed people to think differently, but you can actually see it articulate now. I mean, a good example, I'll give you two contrasts. One that made me burst into tears because I'm a father now is an interesting piece called Proud Parent, I think it's called. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. It's Oreo.
Okay.
And the way they interweave that piece of product into that story is just lovely. It's just this lovely little childhood thing, and Oreo turns up in this, whatever it is, 6-minute piece. But where it was really interesting is it did it in a way that felt like it wasn't branded, wasn't heavy, it was just really subtle, but the message was, you could resonate with it, And the flip side of that, which was one that hit me really hard, there was zero subtlety in it, was something called Womb Stories. And it's by Bodyform. And it was so powerful, and it's so contrasting and so confronting that I found it to really just sort of allow me to wake up and think, oh, wow, here's what they've done. They haven't just told the story end to end in the standard configuration of linear story. They've come at me with different designs, different subject, different styles, different crafts, different points of view, and it just gave me these dimensions of story without having to put anything on. I don't have to put any goggles on to be immersed. I sit there and watch that thing for 8 minutes or something and think, wow, they have just taken me on a ride that's up and down and around and back to front and uncomfortable and happy and sad and confronting, and all of the things that I want to run away from just came to my forefront. And they didn't do it with any gimmicks other than really good craft, told really well in an interesting way that was current. And that for me was just so refreshing. So one thing that I thought was really interesting, that somebody had to do a piece of work that was going to, confront COVID and the people at the front line. And the brand that did that really well was clearly Dove. And they did something called Courage is Beauty. And they took all of these essential workers that work in these hospitals. And imagine having a mask on for 16 hours a day or 20 hours a day or whatever. You take the mask off, you've just got this big platypus beak thing happening on your face because you've been wearing the thing. And it's incredible how confronting those images were. But that's one thing, is to tell a story like that, beautiful. But they took those images, and Lauren, they did this media outplacement, and so close to hospitals and places of essential work. So as people come to enter those places, they pull their courage every single day to be front and center. They get to see them on the work, and I thought, wow, that's a really nice way of making it public as opposed to just being behind closed doors, which I thought was really powerful by Dove.
Was it out of home? Was
So it was
like,
a video series, and then they did an out-of-home piece as well.
cool?
Placed very close to where the essential workers worked.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny. I was kind of nervous, as I think a lot of people were, that Cannes was going to become just like a series of these difficult times, kind of ads. And I was very impressed that it wasn't, right? It was celebrating kind of not the generic, but really the people that thought outside of the box, like you said with Heineken, and putting the advert on the shuttered bar rather than in these difficult times, Heineken is standing next to you.
Yeah, and I think that and it can't celebrate that because that would be one ad told, or one story told 25 ways by a number of brands who didn't know what the hell they're going to do, but they had media placement, so they better do a somber piano ad. That
Right.
wasn't really what was going to happen, and that PSA really didn't land. But it's really more of a design problem. So how are you going to think through this design thinking and figure out what the communication platform should be? Why? Because we've all experienced it. And because we're all experiencing, there's a different way to attack it in a way that makes them feel like, oh, for you, you might want release, so that's what you need is something that makes you laugh. For me, I might need comfort, so I need something that feels very sincere. So it means that the brief is the same, but the emotions are very different. And that's why we saw things that I think zigzagged all the way through the momentum of creativity over the last 16 months. And then something as ridiculous. You talked about Super Bowl. So a Super Bowl ad that did pick up and got celebrated was Reddit's. I don't know if you saw that piece by Reddit where they just did this thing and it just went away. It was in between the cracks and they said, we don't have any money. They just did this end tag. And it worked because people turn up and it's like, oh, wow, that was a really smart idea. So it's really just a smart idea. And those smart ideas, if you're able to kind of, I don't know, balk the system, seem to work really, really well. And, the Reddit one for me gave me some levity around that. It's not just a media buy, it's just a really smart idea done, executed incredibly well.
Totally. What a valuable 5 seconds, I guess it was, for them. I thought it was great. On the, obviously after George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor, brands had to confront racism, not only in this country, but I think globally.
Right.
BLM spread. Did you see any brands that really hit the mark and really turned up that you were impressed with?
I think it's ongoing for me. So from a Cannes perspective, not necessarily to elevate the creativity through Cannes, but as an ongoing, everyone who's participating in it, right? So, at the height of that, Nike had a statement, and Adidas' statement was what Nike said, which is amazing that competitors are actually sort of coexisting for the same point of view, which matters, because if you've got a consciousness, you better have a stance on it, man. So I'm more encouraged by that, not necessarily a singular thing, because some of the parts are greater than the whole in my mind, and that's very, very important. I don't want a singular brand to come to mind. But a piece of work or a movement that I thought was really interesting around that was the voter suppression issues. Because if you have more people of colour, you have more black voters, brown voters, etc., coming out to vote, their points of view are going to resonate more. This is more of a societal issue. There was an organisation, and I think it was a non-for-profit, that actually went and took down these boarded up Black Lives Matters, literally the wood off the places that were all boarded up, who were trying to protect all of their shops. They took them down and they created these booths. And as you go to this booth, and these booths were actually placed in areas, and they did this media buy, where as you're walking it says, you take the second turn to the left and you're almost there. So they gave them directions to go to this little booth, which had all the graffiti wrapped around it because there's all this wood that had been reclaimed from the actual stores that were trying to protect themselves. And all it was that you met with this thing and it just had a QR code and you scan it and it just allows you to vote, register to vote. I thought, now that is genius. Register. And they're putting them in vote register, thank you. And they're doing it in ingenious locations, which typically would be very difficult to access those audiences. So I just thought, well, okay. Because racism, that bitch has always been there. So how do we actually flex around it and build around those issues so it becomes a better society because of it? That for me stood out and thought, okay, that's design thinking. That's genius. And the simplicity of that execution, also awesome. Because those booths looked consistently different because of the graffiti and the messaging on it, but so powerful with the execution of what they're trying to get you to do on it.
Yeah, totally. On the same lines of the voter suppression, a lot of the big brands in Atlanta, when Georgia passed the voter suppression laws, had to sort of tackle what do we do? How do we approach this? Obviously, people sit on both sides. What does Delta do? What does Coca-Cola do? So I thought it was interesting too. I mean, obviously, not related as much to Can, but just how these brands, like the challenges that they've had to face over the past year and how they've had to decide to show up.
And ultimately have a conscience, period, full stop.
Totally.
Because if you're a brand that says, we don't like that, we love, we don't hate, and if you don't like that, don't fly with us. Awesome. We're not for everybody, actually. We're only for those that love. Screw you.
Right.
I think that's incredible.
Right.
And if you don't take that stance, get somebody beside you will. So you better get on board with it.
Totally.
I thought, a little earlier we talked about platform agnostic execution for me is really powerful. But one that I thought was great because it was on their platform was Tinder, which I don't participate in. But they do this Tinder Nights thing where you get to swipe through this game. So between 6 and midnight, they allowed to have live and programmed content. So basically, let me paraphrase. If you and I are on the app, for example, we could play this game where there's this person is injured in the streets. Do you ignore them or do you actually go and help? And you choose your own adventure. And so choosing your own adventure created this data map. So basically, it was a really good data exercise. So ultimately, the match is that when you and I go on a date, for example, you and I have things to talk about. Did you swipe left? Did you swipe right? Did you help? Did you not help? And so it gave people topics to talk about, but it actually matched people based on whether they chose which path, which I thought was a really interesting way of saying, okay, instead of it just being boom, 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 everybody's beautiful, it's like, if I decide this are the things I would actually determine what I want, therefore I should be matched with somebody that is more like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better filtering process. And they did it as this platform. And some of it was live content. I thought, wow, they're using their own app as media to help the data be richer and better. I was impressed by that.
Yeah, that's kind of like the trifecta. And also makes me wonder, though, like, who wants to be with the person that left the person dying on the side of the road? Swipe left for me.
Let's hope that that might be question number one. And if you did,
exactly.
I'm going to ignore that person. You just suddenly very quietly got thrown out of the app.
Sure. That was their screener.
Yeah, that's right. You get to go out and hang out in QAnon or something. I don't know.
That's right. Oh man. So, Shingy, do you mind just telling us like a little bit more about your background and how you became so creatively focused and how you became such a man about town at Can?
Good question. So my background, Lauren, is I'm a designer by trade. I'm a traditional graphic designer. I'm a craftsperson. You want to talk about fontography and hand kerning and letter spacing and all that good stuff? I'm your dude. So I'm a traditional graphic designer. But in my early 20s, I helped invent some internet technology. So I was both creative and I have this technology bent. And, that led me to media, ultimately, in Europe, where I help run media and marketing for 13 countries for AOL. And that's where you and I started working together in our past. And what's interesting about it is that my background has always been, I get media really, really well, but I care about how technology can help move humans forward. How does that relate to media? Well, what you put on it better be better than the space we cut for you to put on it. Just because we have the audience, you should have the communication channel. And so I've always been able to blend both my essence of creativity, which is thankfully core to who I am, with my understanding of technology, but also human needs at the forefront of that. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. So, just part of that is just to be one of those characters in the mix that has a point of view. And I have a very strong point of view about that stuff, and you know that from you and I working in the past. But it's been a while. God, it's been a while, right? You were still, we were a bit younger then.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually didn't know. If you had said to me, what is design thinking as of a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have had any idea. And then I had a friend that helped me out at my last company sort of come up with interesting ways to connect with people in a B2B environment. And we did a lot of design thinking projects. And holy shit, talk about like expanding your mind, expanding the way that you think about things, changing up like what you're taught, you're taught that you go to work and you sit at your computer and then you like do work and you type things, and like design thinking just it almost like challenges you to like think completely outside of how you normally would.
Well, and I hope it would, but most of us on planet Earth are taught in one way of linear thinking. It's called the basic ordering of ideas: top left, bottom right. Exactly what you're talking about. Boom, 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 like this. Doesn't work. That's not how you think. It's not how the body's designed. You have a central system here at the beating heart, goes out to your nervous systems, etc., etc. And there's all these interconnected touch points. So when I was really young, when I was in Hong Kong for a while, I had learned how to mind map. And so one of the things I teach, and one of the things I've been a bit advocate for, particularly at CAM when I educate there, is to teach people how to do mind mapping to get their lateral thinking happening, not linear thinking. And that's where it starts. It starts with permission to go wide. And so that's where I've been very much somebody who's given away IP around how to help people understand how to think differently. I did a virtual graduation for a bunch of designers, and the first thing I looked around and I saw all these coloured rooms, like blue rooms and pink rooms, and I thought to myself, all these kids have gone home and they're hanging out in their 16-year-old bedrooms, Jesus. And I said to them, 2 pieces of advice for you. One is get away from your parents as far as you possibly can that's safe for you. There's no other time in your career where you're going to have this amount of time where you have the leverage to go somewhere and work remotely and do those things safely and still feel like you're able to see some of the world in a different dynamic. That's one thing. The second thing I said to them to do is if you've just studied something and you just studied one particular thing like photography, stop studying photography and start studying things that are much wider in problem solving, like landscape architecture or urban planning, or things that are still associated to the things you're potentially going to do in the core of what you do, but don't feel like they are. And that's where you become a lateral thinker. So I'm very much a big believer in that,
Someday I want to go to one of your design thinking or mind mapping workshops.
Yeah, you should. I'll come and do it for you.
I would love
do a
to.
private one
I would
for
love
you.
that. That would be amazing.
I'm all about it. Yeah,
very cool.
you bet.
Let's do this sometime live, and we'll do it in person. Cool.
Done. This has been
Awesome.
fun, sister. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you joining and just talking about creative stuff. I love it. I love hearing from you. And thanks to all of you for joining. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow our other content.